So SmackDown is moving to 3 hours starting in January if a report from WrestleVotes is to be believed. I have no reason not to believe it because WrestleVotes, the Twitter account, has a very good track record. They also broke that Saturday night's main event is coming back as well, and then that was confirmed. So I'm pretty sure WWE is probably just feeding information to WrestleVotes, or they just have a really accurate source there. I don't know which one it is. In any event, now we're going to have a 3-hour Raw come January on Netflix, which I'm looking forward to because I like the user interface on Netflix. We're going to have a 3-hour SmackDown on USA, and we're going to have a 2-hour NXT, assuming they don't move that to 3 hours in a couple of years either, as my dog finally decides to plunk down. She's been very packish lately. She's been just right next to me a lot. My old lady. Anyways, so let's talk about this, man, because it's good idea, bad idea time. And I'm going to get to some more of your good idea, bad idea suggestion as well. This, though, I got to say, is a bad idea. We're going to explore every asset or every aspect of this in terms of what's a good idea, what are the pros and what are the cons, what makes this a good idea and what makes this a bad idea. She's settling in. First up, why I think this is a bad idea, and then I'll talk about some of the possible pros. Obviously, I have to take myself into consideration when I'm analyzing good idea or bad idea. A couple of weeks ago, I think it was after SummerSlam, Larson and I decided to do our Going in Raw podcast review show after SmackDown on Friday nights, giving up our precious Friday nights. Us being men in our mid-40s, we prefer going out to the bars, to the clubs, going out and doing, I don't know, drugs. I'm joking. No, we like our Friday evenings with our families. But in the interest of our business, I think it was my suggestion that we start doing Friday night SmackDowns again, especially because Roman Reigns is coming back or was coming back. No doubt when WrestleMania season comes around, The Rock will be back as well. And so it just would benefit us to do that. So that pushes our review back an additional hour. Now it's going to be from 5 to 8, the show, and then from 8 to 9, 9:30, our review. And that at that point, we can go get some beers or whatever, which I rarely do, to be honest with you. I'm kind of a homebody. Anyways, so let's talk about if I wasn't a wrestling podcaster, what would this mean in terms of it being a bad idea? Here's my general thesis on this entire thing. When the creative team is firing on all cylinders, they can put out a killer 3-hour show. We see that right now with Raw. There is no guarantee a creative team is going to be firing on all cylinders 52 weeks a year. Therefore, we will be stuck with many episodes of SmackDown, just like we've been stuck with many episodes of Raw that just plain sucked. And sitting there for 3 hours versus 2 hours is kind of a huge difference when something sucks. Right now, SmackDown is not all that great. And I don't think that it's going to get better just because they have an additional hour. It's going to be the same creative team. Similarly, I feel like if Raw went back to 2 hours, which it's going to do, I think, in a couple weeks now, because I think October, November, December is going to be 2 hours, I feel like they are simply going to take what they do and jam it all into that 2 hours, making the 2 hours, giving it more of a sense of urgency, a more faster paced show. Yes, there will probably be some mid-carders cut out. We'll talk about that in a second. But generally speaking, it's going to focus on the best of Raw, the best of what Raw does, and any fat will be trimmed. Right now, there's not a lot of fat on Raw, but it should theoretically take all that good stuff and just make it into a more efficient show. Right now, SmackDown is a 2-hour show that sometimes feels like 3 hours because it's just so kind of slowly paced. It doesn't go bang, 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 bang. It just sort of moves from segment to segment to segment. It's kind of a bizarre thing, and it's kind of a hard thing to articulate. But right now, SmackDown is just sort of like, okay, it's good. It's fine. It's 2 hours. But if you extrapolate that out to 3 hours, it's probably going to be kind of boring, and it's probably going to be kind of a chore to sit through. Now, for the majority of fans, Like, I guess that probably doesn't matter because they'll just change the channel. But for people who actually want to watch really good SmackDown, I don't have faith that the creative team is going to be able to pull that off on a week-to-week basis. SmackDown and Raw were just two differently paced shows. They were two differently crafted shows. And now we're going to have two shows that are kind of the same. Honestly, we should have seen this coming. This probably seemed like the kind of thing that was inevitable, but maybe nobody wanted to manifest this. And so here we are. Now, the positives about SmackDown going to 3 hours are kind of clear. Right now, Raw has a bigger roster than SmackDown does, although I would assume I don't think they're not going to do a draft before WrestleMania, but they might do something to like load some of the people that are sitting and catering and putting on SmackDown, because right now SmackDown kind of feels like it's got a bit of a skeleton crew. One thing that it could accomplish is, given that they don't really give a lot of time to the tag division, it's possible that that's something they can focus on. I think in a bigger picture way, this will allow SmackDown to breathe a little bit more. Various acts who don't get a lot of screen time, like, for example, Apollo Crews and Baron Corbin. I really like Apollo Crews and Baron Corbin, but we see them very sporadically on SmackDown. They're not there all the time. If, in fact, WWE is going to introduce some women's mid-card titles, the Women's Intercontinental and U.S. Championships, then that's perfect. Because I'm a huge advocate of that. More screen time for the women's division, because they have a pretty loaded division that, honestly, Triple H does not give as much attention to as I think he should. So there are some benefits perhaps to that 3 hour runtime. It's just they're going to have to find a way to pick up the pace, to give it a sense of urgency, the same kind of sense of urgency that Raw has right now, which really feels like one big vital chunk of programming. SmackDown is sort of scooted. SmackDown to me has always felt like the show that actually works much better using YouTube. Like getting on YouTube, seeing the big moments of SmackDown. Raw, if you think about it, Raw has most of like the work rate wrestlers. You know, it's got the Sami Zayns, the Gunthers, the Chad Gables. It's got those types of wrestlers there. And so they have those meatier matches there. Now on SmackDown, you've got guys, granted, there are guys like Santos Escobar. He's a hell of a worker, or he's a hell of a wrestler. I hate using the word worker. I'm not a wrestler. He's a heck of a wrestler. There are some of them there, but, you know, by and large, you got like the LA Knights there, the Randy Ortons, the Kevin Owens. They're all fine wrestlers, but they're not necessarily those guys that are going to go on and put on 25-minute matches like the Gunthers that you see on Raw. That's just sort of my opinion. I know Kevin Owens can put on phenomenal matches. It's just been kind of a while since he's really been that guy. Randy Orton put on a hell of a match with Gunther, but it was also fairly divisive. It kind of depends on what you think about the match. I thought it was fine, but it was also 34 minutes long. Probably could have stood to be 25 minutes long. Cody Rhodes, I like him fine in the ring, but again, he's no Gunther. Anyway, you know, there's no Sheamus there on SmackDown. Sheamus is kind of a low-key, fucking awesome wrestler guy, isn't he? Anyways, so yeah, I don't know. I'm just sort of vomiting out my thoughts here about dealing with a 3 hour SmackDown. And in general, I just think it's probably more beneficial to have two main roster shows that are paced differently, that are presented differently. And I think that now we're just going to have two long ass shows that kind of are going to feel very similar to each other. And moreover, I'm just sort of, I don't know, freaked out if we just get another hour of what we already have on SmackDown now. I just don't know if it's going to work. If they actually start weaving stories in and out of the SmackDown narrative the way they do on Raw, the way they used to do with the Bloodline stuff, where you have multiple Bloodline segments that sort of crisscross throughout the roster and various people on the roster are affected. It's sort of this happens and then this happens because that happened and this happens because this happens. You know what I mean? I'm talking like writer talk right now, so I'm sorry. So anyways, yeah, my estimation, bad idea, means less variety, but there's maybe some upside to it in that more people be featured, and that's something I'm a big fan of. So I'm going to say right now for Steve, bad idea, SmackDown going 3 hours. For the wrestlers that might get some more screen time, good idea. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the other good idea, bad ideas that you guys dropped me. First up, son of the Pakistani belt maker. That's your whole YouTube name is Son of the Pakistan. Hey, tell your dad thank you. I appreciate it, my man in Pakistan. The overall concept of a hard brand split, good idea, bad idea. I think for WWE, oh, man, this is a tough one. This is a tough one because the roster is so big. The roster is massive. Because if they don't have a brand split, people are not going to be featured and they're not. So yeah, it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea. I liked it back in the day because again, you had SmackDown, you had Raw, and they kind of felt like different shows. When Triple H was basically running Raw back, during his reign of terror, whatever you want to call it, with the big gold belt, that had a different feel of a show than like JBL, running SmackDown around kind of that same time. He had like Eddie Guerrero over there, a couple others. It had a different feel to it. And then when you do cool things like brand invasions or brand warfare, or whatever you want to brand on brand warfare, which I'm a fan of if done right, I think it's really cool. You have sort of two separate companies that can then interact. You can have people with relationships, they get split up, or prior relationships, prior rivalries, they get split up in a couple of years, they get back together. It's like, oh, wow, lots of change since then. Like, for example, right now, Jey Uso being on Raw away from the Bloodline stuff, and then you have the Bloodline stuff going down. It's going to be interesting after he's been gone for this long and has made a name for himself to go back there and be like, hey, Roman, look what I've done with myself. I'm now the guy who can't win the big one. But no, a hard brand split. If the roster is big enough and you find yourself in a tough, and as a booker, you have a tough time, I'm talking about WWE, finding a space for everybody. You got to remember the brand split came about because they absorbed WCW and ECW. So if that's your company, if you are basically three companies in one, guess what? You have to be creative with how you do things. Brand split makes sense. And given that WWE still has a ton of people on their roster, a brand split makes sense. A hard brand split makes sense. I prefer the harder, the better. Hardy8966 says Jericho versus Triple H main eventing WrestleMania 18. Everybody loves WrestleMania 17. They're like, oh, it's the best WrestleMania of all time. It's the greatest WrestleMania. That's how I feel about WrestleMania 18. It's much more of an invasion WrestleMania, which I know the invasion came at like the tail end of WrestleMania 17, or it wasn't even that. It was like before. I don't know when it was. Anyways, WrestleMania 18 kind of felt like an actual invasion. Look at the matchups here. You got Undertaker versus Ric Flair. You got Hulk Hogan versus The Rock. And then you got the NWO, Scott Hall versus Steve Austin. That's like a big deal. That's like really cool. By the way, WWF should have done that invasion way different, but whatever. Everybody knows that. Bad idea. Triple H versus Jericho main eventing WrestleMania. Bad idea. Bad idea. Bad idea. Rock versus Hulk Hogan should have main evented WrestleMania. I don't think, which is crazy, I don't think Vince McMahon understood that the crowd would stop giving a shit about the NWO and start giving a shit again about Hulk Hogan in the WWF. That's what happened there. And it was fascinating to see it in real time that the crowd started chanting like Hulkamania or whatever when Hogan first showed up on the stage, when the NWO first came in. And it was like, oh wow. We're going to have no choice, thanks to that Rock Hulk Hogan match, we're going to have no choice but to turn Hulk Hogan babyface. So they did that like on the fly, if I'm not mistaken. So, the idea, that the WWE WWF championship would go on last, I get it. I understand it. Triple H probably politicked for it, and he usually got his way. But there's no way Rock versus Hulk Hogan should have been anywhere but the last match, anywhere but the main event. As awesome as Triple H's return was, bad idea. Bad idea. It was a bad idea at the time. And if you look at it in retrospect, I think they all know it was a bad idea. Next up, Granville Nation says Goldberg coming back in 2016. Proof's in the pudding. Good idea. I'm not a Goldberg guy. I am not a Goldberg guy at all. I did not care to see him back. I was like, what is this shit? But then, like, they did that 1 minute match with him and Brock where he beat Brock in like a heartbeat. I thought it was kind of cool. I was like, whoa, didn't expect that one. Didn't see that happening. And then they absorbed the whole Festival of Friendship Universal title. That was when I was like, oh, this is crap. When they jobbed out Kevin Owens to Goldberg in record time. Goldberg wins the Universal Championship. And then the Festival of Friendship stuff, I think, had to be relegated to the United States Championship. That was poor execution for them. But for that first chunk of Goldberg's run, I don't know. He was fine. All of a sudden, the dude could cut good promos. So I'm not against it. I think it was a good idea to bring him back. The guy could still go. He looked phenomenal. He could still go. So yeah, good idea. I don't think there's not downside. Eventually he probably should have stayed away. Him beating the Fiend was a terrible idea. That was awful. That was stupid. Don't do that. All right, we're going to end on this one. And I'm going to preface it by being serious, Steve, here. Because this is kind of a serious topic. But I keep on getting asked it in these threads. And I know you guys want my opinion. I'm not going to put it in the thumbnail. I'm not going to put it in the title. I'm just going to bury it here at the end of the show. And give you my honest to God thoughts on it. I know this is a good idea, bad idea. But the question is, good idea or bad idea? WWE continuing on with Over the Edge 99 after Owen Hart fell. FRJ here clarifies, as in continuing the show before they knew he had passed. I think it's probably fine to continue the show before you have that information. I don't know the exact timeline of who knew what when. Hard for me to say, as a human being, it would be hard for me to ask those performers to go out and perform knowing what has happened. Knowing that even there was the possibility that he might not make, because I think everybody understood, the actual what happened in that situation, that he fell from such a high height. To continue on after he has passed, and I understand. Here's the thing: I understand. This is one of those things where maybe to some people it's a very cut and dry thing. And maybe it is, and maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. But in that day and age, when there was no social media, when information did not disseminate as quickly as it does now, you're looking at a different landscape. You have an arena filled with people, some children as well. And I don't know that stopping the show early, and if you do that, the necessity of making that announcement to the crowd as to why you're stopping it early, because I think that would be a necessity. I don't know that is the smart way to go. When you think of the wrestlers there, the people that he was closest with, I think for their sake, an argument absolutely could be made, and I would probably agree with it, that you stop the show. But I understand the flip side to it. You've got an arena, 12,000 people, whatever it is, and now you're tasked with letting them know that we're stopping the show because this happened. That to me is not an easy decision to make. I don't know. What is surprising is that there wasn't a police presence there to force their hand and say, that is not necessarily a crime scene, but that is a scene that we need to investigate. So we're shutting this down now. I don't know the ins and outs of that, but that probably should have happened. I think that was suggested on, the Dark Side of the Ring thing. So this is one of those, I'm not going to boil it down to good idea or bad idea because it's a very serious tragedy. I will say I understand that it is, even understanding that Vince McMahon is who he is. I understand that that is not necessarily, I think, a cut and dry thing. Me, I would probably err on the side of stopping the show. I think mainly once you find out that he has passed, I think you stop the show. But understanding also that there is an arena of 10,000 people that you also to a degree have to answer to. And if I'm sitting there with my kid at this show and they stop it and they say, ladies and gentlemen, we've received word that this person has passed, that's a tough thing for me to sit there and go through with my kid. Like, if anybody's going to announce, is going to tell her, if me and Bama go travel back in time, if anybody's going to tell my kid that that's the situation, I kind of prefer that to be myself. So I've got one of Bama's friends is going to go to SmackDown on Friday, tonight, because this is going up Friday morning. And, you know, thinking of her, I'm like, man, I don't know that I would want that to happen in the arena. And I feel like if you're going to stop the show, it's probably a necessity to let the audience in on what happened because they're going to find out anyways. And a lot of people in the place, I think, did find out because, you know, some people I think might have had cell phones back there. People near the JR might have heard him say what had happened. I don't know. I'm sure people found out some way, shape, or form. But yeah, that's a tough one. And I can't boil it down to a good idea, bad idea. Those are just my thoughts about it. If it was me in that situation, I think there's a good chance that I would have stopped the show. But I wasn't in the shoes of the people making the decision then. And you can't give them the benefit of the doubt because it's Vince McMahon, and you cannot give him the benefit of the doubt on pretty much anything. But yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one because I think it's a bit more complicated than a simple yes or no. So that's the best answer I can give. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about SmackDown moving to 3 hours. You guys hyped? Is this good news? It's like Christmas to you? Christmas come Fridays? Oh boy. We'll see. Hey, you know what? If they jazz up SmackDown by January, and we'll be eating good, I guess, huh? I guess we'll be eating good. But everybody's been pining for a 2-hour Raw. We get that for like 3 months, and then it's like, nope, 6 hours of main roster. Hit that subscribe, hit that like. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you around.